All right, let's get right into it. We're looking at a really strange situation in the financial markets today. The very groups that are supposed to keep things stable might actually be the ones causing all the jitters. So in this explainer, we're going to break down what's going on and why things feel so shaky.
So here's the big paradox we're facing. The central banks, the institutions whose whole job is to create financial stability, just might, be making this market slump worse. How on earth is that possible? Well, let's unpack it. Look, we all know how it works. Scary headlines in the media get clicks, right? We're used to that. But what's really unusual, and frankly a little unnerving, is when that anxiety starts coming from the world's most powerful central bankers. That's a whole different ballgame, and it's sending a wave of real fear through the entire investment world.
And you can see this just by looking at how the big players are acting. On one hand, you have the U.S. Federal Reserve, which is basically admitting, hey, we're not totally sure what's going on. For markets, that just creates a ton of doubt. Then you've got the European Central Bank, which is sounding the alarm on inflation. And of course, the market immediately starts pricing in future rate hikes. And then there's the Bank of England, taking this much calmer, more common sense approach, saying this inflation is probably temporary. It's a mess of conflicting messages.
Okay, so to really get why these messages are causing so much chaos, we have to dig into the economic debate at the heart of all this. It all boils down to one thing: diagnosing the kind of inflation we're actually dealing with. Because if you get the diagnosis wrong, you're absolutely going to prescribe the wrong medicine.
So let's break it down. There are basically two flavors of this problem. First, you have a supply shock. This happens when there are just fewer goods to go around, maybe because of a war or a shortage. Prices go up simply because stuff is scarce. Then you have a demand shock. That's the classic too much money chasing too few goods scenario, where the economy is just running too hot. Now, the argument that many are making today is that we are firmly, without a doubt, in a supply shock situation.
And to understand why that matters so much, you need to get this one key idea: inelastic demand. Think about it like this. You need gas for your car to get to work, right? Well, even if the price at the pump doubles, you still gotta buy it. Your demand doesn't really change. It's inelastic. And that's exactly what's happening with energy right now, which is at the very root of our inflation problem.
Which brings us to the million-dollar question. If we have inflation that's being caused by a supply problem, and things people have to buy no matter what, is the tool that the Fed and the ECB are reaching for, threatening to raise interest rates, actually the right one for the job?
Well, here's how this can go really wrong. Step 1, a supply shock, say in oil, jacks up energy prices. Okay. Step 2, the central banks see this inflation and start talking tough, threatening to hike rates. But here's the catch. Step 3, just the threat of rate hikes is enough to tighten up the money supply and slow down the whole economy. And step 4? Well, people still need to heat their homes and drive their cars, so energy demand stays high. It's inelastic, remember? And the result? Step 5, you get a slowing economy, but you still have the original inflation problem. You fix nothing.
So this is the really crucial point. By using a tool that's designed to crush consumer demand, the central banks risk making the economic slowdown way worse without ever touching the actual root of the inflation. The cure could end up being so much worse than the disease.
But what if there was another way? A path that isn't driven by panic, but, by the actual economics textbooks. Let's take a look at what that different response might have looked like.
So, if you cracked open the manual, what should a central bank do when faced with a supply shock? Well, it's pretty clear. First, you come out and acknowledge that the inflation is from a supply issue. Second, you state very clearly that these pressures are probably temporary. And here's the most important part. You shift everyone's focus away from that scary headline inflation number and get them looking at core inflation instead. The goal is to calm the markets down, not fuel the fire.
So what in the world is core inflation? It's actually a pretty simple idea. It's a measure of inflation that just pulls out the really volatile stuff like food and energy. The very things that are causing the current supply shock. By focusing on the core, a central bank signals that it's looking at the real long-term trend and not just having a knee-jerk reaction to a temporary price spike.
I mean, just imagine for a second if the Fed and ECB had said something like this. This simple sentence does it all. It acknowledges the problem, it frames it as temporary, and it reassures everyone that they're focused on the right long-term goal. It's a message of confidence and control, not fear.
Okay, so that's the alternative path. But since they didn't take it, what's been the real-world consequence? Let's connect the dots between all this central bank talk and the chaos we're actually seeing in the markets. Right, so this isn't just theory. This excess of fear coming from the central banks directly forces the hands of the big-time institutional investors, the ones who actually move the markets. They hear the official alarm bells ringing, and they have no choice but to take defensive action.
And that sets off a nasty chain reaction. Here's how it works. The big fund managers perceive all this risk, so they rush out and buy put options, which are basically insurance policies against the market falling. Now, the dealers who sell them that insurance, they have to protect themselves. So what do? They sell futures. You put all of that together, and you get this massive wave of selling pressure that aggravates any decline and can turn a small dip into a serious slump. The fear becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And that leaves us with this really unsettling final thought. We're in a situation where the actions taken by our financial guardians might be a major part of the problem they're trying to solve. So it really begs the question, when the solution starts adding to the problem, what on earth comes next?